On May 22nd, 2020, officials with the Roane County, Tennessee Sheriff's Office received a call about a young boy riding his scooter all alone in the road. So neighbors called the police. The boy would go on to tell investigators that he was one of several children who had been adopted, and that he and his adopted siblings were routinely abused, starved, and locked in cages in the basement. But that wasn't even the worst of it. What this boy told investigators would end up exposing a house of horrors worse than the Turpins. This is the story of Michael and Shirley Gray. Let's get into it. Hi folks, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Delaney, and I'm a true crime writer, forensic geek, and all-around murder nerd. On this channel, what I like to do is take deep dives into interesting and unusual cases, and I tend to cuss a lot. So, if you're into that sort of thing, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe. If not, that's cool, you do you. So, this story really starts out in May of 2020 in 10 Mile, Tennessee, which is an unincorporated community in eastern Tennessee near the shores of Watts Bar Lake. It's less of a town and more of a vacation spot for people visiting the lake, boating, fishing, water skiing, that kind of thing. So it's really rural. So some people living on Dry Fork Valley Road noticed this young boy riding his scooter all alone in the road. I don't know if they thought he was too young to be out playing in the road all alone, or if there was something else about him that caught their attention. But they went out and asked him where his parents were. He said he didn't know, and he also didn't know where he was. So the neighbors called the police, which you might think that's a bit much for a 10-year-old kid just out riding his scooter unsupervised. But there was something about that kid that made the neighbors squint. And that was a good thing, as we'll see. The boy, who they just called T, told the police that he was adopted and was one of several kids who had been adopted by a couple named Michael and Shirley Gray. So the cops looked them up. Their address was right there on that same road, Dry Fork Valley Road, and they took him back there to his adopted parents. But when the police brought him back to the Gray's house, the couple apparently didn't even realize that he'd been gone. It was also immediately clear that this house was not fit for children. And I want to just give a content warning here that it gets pretty disgusting. So if you have a weak stomach, you might want to sit this one out. The officer said the home was filled with the smell of urine. There was human and animal feces all throughout the home, on the walls, and even on a bed. There was no running water in the home, exposed wires, and trash everywhere. So the police took everyone to the Department of Children's Services office in Kingston. T told the DCS officials that the Grays regularly abused them, withheld food, and locked away their adopted kids in cages and the basement as punishment. He also told them that at that very moment, one of his siblings, a 15-year-old boy that they call M, was locked in the basement. But that wasn't the worst of it. T told the officers that a few years earlier, his adopted sister, Sophie, had been locked in the basement for stealing food. A couple of months later, Sophie died, and the Grays had kept her body in a cardboard box in the house until they buried her in the backyard. Under questioning, the Grays were both pretty forthcoming. They waived their right to an attorney. Michael admitted that his 15-year-old son, M, was in the basement. He said that within a month of them moving to that house in 2016, he'd been sent there as punishment for stealing food from the fridge. Police immediately went back to the house to rescue him. They went down to the basement, which was partially flooded, moldy, filled with old trash, and had exposed wires everywhere. They found M down there in a tiny little concrete room, less than 3 foot by 4 foot. M had been locked down there, fed only bread and water, and cut off from contact with the outside world, with only a bucket for a toilet and magazine pages for toilet paper for 4 years. So, besides T and M, there was only one more adopted child in the house, a 13-year-old girl referred to as L. All 3 of them were severely malnourished to the point that their growth was stunted. It was also clear that despite the Grays claiming the kids were all homeschooled, they had little to no education. None of them had been to a doctor of any kind for at least 6 years. One of them didn't even appear to know how a refrigerator worked. How many times have we heard this story before? But the abuse and starvation weren't even the worst of it. When Michael was asked about the allegation that there was a girl buried in the backyard, Michael freely admitted that yes, one of their adopted daughters, Sophie, had died in 2017 when she was 11. He even offered to show investigators where she was buried. So, who are these people? Not a whole lot is known about Michael and Shirley Gray before this case. We do know that they were originally from Mississippi, and there they had 2 biological children in the 80s, a daughter named Carolyn and a son, Anthony Michael Jr., who went by Bubba. The Gray family seems to have lived in poverty. They moved around a lot between Mississippi, Florida, and Tennessee. The couple had 2 bankruptcies, and Shirley had 1 charge in Mississippi for writing a bad check. But other than that, they didn't have anything else on their records. They moved to Halls, Tennessee, which is in Knox County, in the mid-90s. Even after their 2 biological children had reached adulthood, they all continued to live together in a big house. Michael and Shirley lived in the downstairs/finished basement. Bubba and his partner, and sometimes Carolyn and her kids, would live in the upstairs. And that's when the Grays apparently found a way to make a little extra income. They began adopting children. They would eventually adopt a total of 5 kids. All 5 were listed with the state as homeschooled, and every year Shirley would send in paperwork verifying that they were meeting their academic assessments. She also signed them all up for TennCare, which is the state's Medicaid system, and received benefits from the state to the tune of about $2,900 a month. In rural Tennessee, that's nothing to sneeze at. So while they were living there in the house in Knox County, the Grays started engaging in the same kinds of abuse they would continue for years, making the kids wear the same clothes for days, not allowing them to bathe, locking them in dog crates as punishment, and physically abusing them. It was also during this time that one of their adopted kids, 6-year-old Jonathan, got sick. The Grays never took him to a doctor or got him any kind of medical care, despite the fact that they were getting state benefits to do just that. Then one day, Jonathan was just gone. The Grays told the other kids that he'd gone away to live with another family, but the Grays would continue to file paperwork, collect benefits, and claim him on their taxes. In June of 2016, the couple and their now 4 adopted kids moved out of the Knox County house and into the house in 10 Mile, which is in Roane County. It was less than a month after they moved into the new house when Sophie got in trouble for, what else, stealing food, and was banished to the basement. Not long after that, Em was given the same punishment. At first, according to the police, the kids were locked in dog crates in the basement, then in that tiny concrete cell that Michael had built specifically for that purpose. The kids were only fed white bread and water and locked in a filthy, damp basement with only a bucket for a toilet. So it's not surprising that Sophie got sick. Just like Jonathan, the Grays didn't take her to a doctor or get her any kind of medical care. So sometime in early 2017, she died. The Grays kept Sophie's body in a cardboard box hidden inside a wall until the ground had thawed enough for Michael to dig her a grave. Michael took investigators right to the gravesite. It was next to this pole barn where they kept chickens and goats. When the investigators dug in that spot, they found skeletonized remains belonging to a girl of about Sophie's age. Michael and Shirley Gray were immediately arrested and held on a $1.5 million bond, but the investigation wasn't over yet. A few days after their search of Michael and Shirley Gray's home in Roane County, authorities got a warrant to search their son's home in Knox County. Knox County investigators believed Bubba was well aware that the children were being abused while they lived with him, and he might know what really happened to Jonathan. Bubba told investigators he was unaware of any abuse within the household by his parents, and he did not know about the children's death. But that's a little sus considering his text messages to his parents. One of them said, "Hey, do I need to put Em and Sophie on the census? I don't know if they share info with the IRS." So anyway, investigators searched his house and property, and in the backyard, underneath a peach tree, they found skeletal remains wrapped in a trash bag. They believe the remains belonged to Jonathan Dalton Gray. In October 2020, Michael Anthony Gray Jr. was indicted on 20 counts, including first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, child neglect, and abuse of a corpse. That same month, Michael and Shirley pled not guilty to multiple charges of felony murder, child abuse, child neglect, kidnapping, theft of property, and abuse of a corpse. When Bubba appeared in court in August of 2021, there was apparently much discussion, and eventually it was determined that he did not directly abuse the children, but he did neglect the abuse that his parents were inflicting on them. The judge also announced his decision to sever Bubba's case from his parents, so he'd be tried separately. On May 14, 2024, Michael and Shirley pled guilty to the felony murder charges and received consecutive life sentences. Since they were both in their 60s, they will spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Shortly afterwards, Bubba pled guilty to his 2 felony charges, including criminally negligent homicide in the death of Jonathan and felony child abuse for the mistreatment of Sophie. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison and just under 7 years of supervised probation. Michael and Shirley Gray's sentencing hearing was emotional, especially the victim impact statements. Their former adopted daughter, Elle, gave a victim impact statement through a representative where she blamed DCS for letting them slip through the cracks. DCS, you failed us, the statement said. I think DCS should have a private conversation or meeting with the children so they can hear the children's side of the story about the foster home they are living in. The 2 boys, T and M, spoke in person. T, the boy who blew this whole thing wide open, was at that point 15. Part of his statement was, your house was my prison, but now your house is your prison. He finished his statement with this, don't do unto others as they have done to you. Even though you have done evil, I forgive you. Thankfully, this horrific crime spurred lawmakers into actually doing something to prevent it from happening again.
Senator Ken Yeager from Kingston got state law changed because of this case. It says any parents who get state money for adopting children need to provide medical records or school enrollment records every year. He says hopefully to stop this from ever happening again. Reporting from Knoxville, I'm Vinay Simlot.
If you suspect a child is being abused, please contact your state's DHS or call the national hotline number on the screen. One call could save a life. So that's this sad story. It really sounds a lot like the Turpins, but I guess because there were only a few children involved, it didn't get quite the same amount of media play, but it was just as horrific and even worse. At least the Turpin children all lived. So thank you so much for listening to this terrible story. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and subscribe for more. Till next time, Darklings.